Welcome back to These Things Are Written. Glad you're joining us on this Thursday as we begin Galatians chapter 4. We are continuing to look at Paul's argument that he gives concerning how man is made right before God by faith and not by works from the law. In other words, so that the Galatians do not need to become Jews in obedience to the law in order to first become Christians. So far, he has refuted the opponents on terms of a personal example of him confronting Paul to his face. He also gave a number of examples using logic and the Bible as his proofs for why righteousness came through Christ and not by works of the law. Again, that aha moment for me and for some of you as well, that the promise came 400 plus years before the law. So the law did not replace the promise. And now he's going into this in his own terms. Oh, I'm sorry. He also used some human reasoning, human examples as well in that. There we go. I knew there was something else. Chapter 4. I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different than a slave, though he is the owner of everything, but he is under guardians and managers until the date set by his father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of this world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, so that we might receive adoptions as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. The first few verses are very similar to chapter 3, 23 through 29. This is using more of what you might call a modern day example, whereas the other one was more of a biblical understanding. This is expanding it so that the Greeks that he is writing to, the Gentiles, might be better able to understand than with the law according to the Jews, those who were working against. He's moving the focus away from Abraham to an example they understand. In verse 3, it talks about the elementary principles of the world. Most of the commentaries and people think that is really the pagan view of the pagan past of the Galatians. The elementary principles of the world is really to make religion about what we do, whether it is the legal requirements set for the Jews, and the Judaism became all about obedience, rules instead of relationship. Francis Pieper, one of our church former presidents of our synod, said that there are two types of religion: those who trust in Jesus for their salvation and those who don't, those that do it by works. And here, the elementary principles is that idea that we have to work, we have to do the things right so that we will please the gods. But we don't. God loves us as we are. He called us to be his sons and his daughters. Let's move to verses 4 and 5. It talks about the fullness of time. Now, some have said the fullness of time is during the Roman, because they had great roads, they had a unified language, they had a unified government, all of those things. But Paul doesn't mention that. He says when the time is right, according to the time that God had set beforehand, that he sent his son into the world. And this is interesting. If you look at it, God sent his son, the first part, born under the law, second part, to redeem those under the law, which connects back to the second part, that we might receive adoption as sons. Again, going back to the first part. So it goes part 1, part 2, connection, part one connection. We call that a chiasm as we look at it, and it's just a way of him writing to show that emphasis of how Jesus fulfilled it. And through Jesus, we have that redemption from being under the law and adoption as sons. Verse 6, and because you are sons, God sent his Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Abba is what we might say the word for daddy, crying out to God the Father, daddy, that it is more than just a stiff father expression, but one that a child would speak to his father, to his daddy, one out of love and a close relationship. And then verse 7 kind of summarizes this whole section. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. What is an heir? An heir is a person with a privileged position. That privileged position that we have as an heir, as a son of God, inheriting his kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, where we will live for all eternity with him through Christ. And Christ alone, not based upon our works, but based upon Jesus. Come back tomorrow. We'll continue to look at this great chapter. God bless.